footsteps of my King.
Hey everyone, welcome to this newest episode of Idleman Unplugged. Actually a very important message to not only our nation, but I think specifically the young adults as they're growing up. And we're hearing more and more, especially over the last couple of decades, this whole freedom of speech. And also it came on the heels of freedom of press. They all kind of came together back when our nation was being built, is because the founders recognized that, hey, if you suppress the opposite view, you can turn into, it can become tyranny. And that's actually what we're finding today, how they're suppressing the other side of it, especially during COVID, what, the major corporations were doing, social media influencers and big social media. What they were doing is they were not wanting to hear the other side of things. And that tactic has not changed. And so, a couple people that I tune into now and then. Of course, it depends on what the content is, and hopefully there's not much cussing. It depends on who the guest is. And I don't watch a lot of it, but, Joe Rogan is, I think, the most popular podcaster, in the world right now. And then Bet David. I think we've only had one exchange on Twitter. A lot of great content. Really love, his values, what he stands for, hard work ethic. About family, about calling things out, and the guest he has on a show, does a great job interviewing. I think we have a similar background. He was with Bally's. I was with 24 Hour Fitness. He was in sales and I was in sales, and then God pulled me into ministry. And thank God for that. And then he, obviously take a different course, and a lot of great guests. And of course, my podcast is, a lot different. It's for a Christian community. I have to, keep that in mind with the topics, and even not just the content, but what we say on the program, everything from cursing or being a little bit too vulgar. And so that's where, it gets a little dicey on playing some of these clips. But it was an incredible clip here of Patrick on Joe Rogan's show, on his program. And they're talking about one of the most important issues confronting us today, the LGBTQ, and then they add IA+. It used to be just, LGTP, lesbian, gay, bisexual. And then they added transgender, and then Q, I think queer, and I don't know what the others are. And we can see, there's a 500% increase, 700% increase in certain areas. So it's being actually fueled by the media. And as young adults, they want to do what is cool and what is popular, not necessarily what is right. And so that's why all this push on Target, Budweiser, Patrick talked about before, the EAS, I think it's the ESG score, where you got Vanguard, I think it's BlackRock, one of those, these top leading, hedge funds that are actually controlling corporate America and causing them to go woke. And that's why, he's like, Budweiser, that makes no sense. You're going to use Dylan for, something that construction workers and farmers drink. And so that's why, though, you got top corporations, hedge funds are really controlling, they've got trillions of dollars, more than all the other nations except for China and America. And they are the puppet masters. And so they're pushing this agenda that is harmful for our kids. It is ungodly. It is perverted, and it is a form of child abuse. End of story. Plain and simple. No question to that in my mind. You let adults choose as they get older. But here's what I disagree with. And here's where I think we've compromised and we've given up ground. It's on this whole issue of freedom of speech. Okay. Freedom of speech. You have to look at the founders. If you go and you look at, Jefferson, Hamilton, I've read some of their writings. Of course, Benjamin Franklin. If you look at the Federalist Papers, and, you look at what were they trying to do? Okay. Freedom of speech. We don't want to stifle opposing views. So here's the thing, though, with freedom of speech that many people don't recognize. They just think it's a blanket statement. It's actually not. When my freedom of speech begins to hurt others, I no longer have the right to speak. Now, people could say, well, that's pretty vague. Well, yeah, it can be, but when you are, there's certain things you should not say. And it will, if people get, flagged, if they're praising Hitler and putting down the Jews, that's he shouldn't be given freedom of speech because it's not helpful for society. It actually hurts society. It hurts kids. It doesn't help them. So when we talk about LGBTQ, and I just spoke at a school board meeting here in Los Angeles County. You can find it on Rumble. I don't know if YouTube still has it up. Pastor confronts school board. Just called them out, and what they're doing is they're allowing books. It's so perverted. It's just absolutely disgusting and perverting what they're allowing. It's mind-boggling how these people, unless they're so deceived and in darkness themselves that, hey, let's pull everyone in the darkness we can. That, and of course we know it's a demonic from a spiritual angle for sure. And so freedom of speech was actually allowed to, show opposing views, but you also had it was also within the framework of social responsibility. You had a responsibility to make sure that you didn't cross the line in this area of freedom of speech. For example, pornography would never, ever be allowed as freedom of speech, freedom of press, freedom of expression, because it's too harmful to society. You can't, and so on this issue, what I'm getting at here is these books, and Pat and Joe would agree that, you can't place these books in schools and teachers, pushing this agenda and having kids read it without parental consent. I would go a couple steps further and say, whether it's parental consent or not, those perverted pornographic books that the Bible says are an abomination, strong word, but hey, it's what it is. I should not even be allowed in the school. We shouldn't even be having this discussion. So what do I disagree with? It only took 7 minutes to get there, right? What I disagree with is the common view that's out there among many people that, and Pat will go on to say, about the book, how it can be, he doesn't care if it's in Barnes and Noble and different things, but let's go ahead and hear that clip first. And then I'm going to comment on it.
Why would they teach me that? That's what they're teaching in schools right now in many different places. Oh, they're not doing that. There's no way they're doing that.
There
right?
are books that do show that. Yeah.
There are books, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So if a person wants to sell that book at Barnes and Noble, go for it. If a person wants to sell that book on Amazon, go for it. But what do you think about parents that are protesting all over the place, where in some districts, these guys are saying, no, this is recommended reading by the teacher and it's normal, it's okay, you should learn about this at an early age. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it's very clear that there are certain teachers that have an agenda, and that their agenda is to indoctrinate children into this LBGT mindset.
Okay. And then goes on to talk about that. Totally agree with that. But what they're talking about earlier, where I disagree, is because it is so perverted and bad and not good, it should not be allowed in Barnes and Noble or Amazon or anyway. It is perverted sex, teaching kids something that is, let's say you don't even think, let's say it teaches them normal sex. It actually teaches them homosexuality and things that are so disgusting I can't say on here. Let's just say, well, what about if we teach a 10-year-old normal sex? No, still not a healthy age. Wait for the parents to bring that up and teach them. And you see, kids grow, they blossom. They can't handle all this disgusting sickness and darkness at a young age. So I don't even think it should be allowed in Barnes and Noble. I don't even think, so Shane, are you banning books? I'm saying absolutely some books should be banned if they injure society and they injure children. And so something's very interesting. I think it was The People versus Ruggles. You can look this up. I believe it was 1811, People versus Ruggles. Don't quote me on that exactly, going off of memory here. But a man actually went to court before a judge, and he said I can't say it here on here, but he said some pretty bad things about Jesus and his mother, and I guess to children and different things. And the judge, the attorney said, hey, no problem. Freedom of speech, man. The judge said, absolutely not. Nothing could be more harmful to our society and to the morals of little children than to call such profanity lawful. And that's not the exact quote. I'm paraphrasing. But that's what the judge ruled. And that was common in America. Now, you might say, that's a little extreme, 3 months in jail and fined. But I tell you what, it would shut people up who are trying to hurt people, hurt others. Hate speech is really not hate speech. It's love speech. And when I tell people, hey, this lifestyle is wrong and we love you, that's hate speech. No, really, you're the hater. Not you watching. I'm saying those are coming against God's values. They're the hater. Those who are perverting children, they're the hater. And woe be to you if you lead one of these little ones astray. It'd be better for you if a millstone was hung around your neck than to ever lead one of these little ones astray. So anyway, I appreciate what they're saying, but freedom of speech should not be allowed and never was allowed. You can look at what they call it is precedent. So if the Supreme Court sets a precedent, it's like in the Bible, in theological circles, you call it the law of first mention. How the Bible first used something is pretty consistent throughout Scripture. Well, precedent is, what does the Supreme Court say about this issue in the late, 1700, or let's say, I don't know when it was formed. John Jay was the first Supreme Court justice. By the way, he acknowledged Jesus Christ in his last will and testament. I don't know exactly when the Supreme Court started, but let's just say, so they would look at, what did the Supreme Court say in 1820? What did the Supreme Court say in, 1860? What did the Supreme Court say? So for years, I'm like 150 years, especially until separation of church and state came in, which is not in the Constitution. And it was just completely, it's just a lie from the pit of hell saying that we have to be quiet about political issues. So they would always look at what the Supreme Court says. And if you look at all the cases on freedom of speech, they would always rule in the favor of protecting society. Like, this is not good for society. This hurts people. Pornography hurts people. Saying gross and disgusting things hurts people. Teaching kids sexuality, perverted sexuality at a young age hurts people. This is not freedom of speech. Okay. So it's about banning books, and people can't just say whatever they want if it hurts other people. Now, people might use that against me. Well, Shane, your words are hurting other people. No, here's the thing. When I preach the gospel, my attitude shouldn't hurt people, right? But the truth will offend. So that's biblical hurting. And biblical hurting is a good thing because it convicts us. See, what you're doing is you're being convicted by the truth, and that should cause you to turn to God. What these people are doing, they're saying things out of anger or just belittling people, hurting them, pulling them down, teaching kids perversion. That's a quantum leap to make that connection. So that is the difference. God allows us freedom of speech. We speak the truth in love, but when it comes to these things, they should not be allowed anywhere. And if the Supreme Court, with a Supreme Court, more men and women on that Supreme Court with a backbone, they would, and many of them do. I appreciate the heart of many of them. But they would look at this issue a little bit differently and say, no, we can't just let anything fly. These things on Instagram that are soft porn, Facebook, all under the banner of freedom of speech, or writing whatever you want, freedom of press. That's not what the founders envisioned. And it will hurt our society if we don't do something about it. So anyway, that's my opinion on this topic of freedom of speech, and I hope it helps.